Chapter 1. The Mysterious Thefts. The rain came down in sheets, turning the streets of Chicago's South Loop into a glistening maze of waterlogged asphalt. Detective Sam Carter stood beneath the flickering streetlight at the edge of the alley, his coat soaked through, his broad shoulders hunched against the downpour. But the chill in the air didn't seem to bother him. What bothered him was the crime scene in front of him. A single police officer stood near the entrance to the building, shaking his head.
"It's the same as the others, Detective. A robbery gone wrong. But something's off this time." Sam didn't respond immediately. He had seen his share of burglaries, but this one felt different. The victim was an elderly woman, a longtime resident of the neighborhood, her prized collection of antiques looted from her apartment. She had been found hours ago, still in her chair, lifeless. There were no signs of a struggle, no obvious injuries, just an empty apartment with its most valuable possessions gone. Sam took a long drag from his cigarette, then flicked it into the puddle at his feet. He scanned the room, his sharp eyes taking in every detail. The woman's small, cozy apartment was cluttered with old relics and trinkets. Most of it was worthless junk, but to her, it was everything. There were dusty shelves filled with porcelain dolls, a few old books stacked haphazardly on the coffee table, and a worn-out rug beneath the chair.
"Who called it in?" Sam asked, glancing toward the officer.
"Her neighbor.
Said she hadn't seen her all day. When she went to check, she found her like this." Sam nodded, moving past the officer and into the apartment. It smelled of old wood, cigarette smoke, and something faintly metallic. His eyes settled on the space near the window, where the woman's most treasured piece had once been a small, brass statue of a serpent, its coils intricately crafted. It was gone now, along with other small but valuable antiques.
"Anything taken?" Sam asked the officer again, this time more sharply.
"All the valuables," the officer replied. "But the place doesn't look like it was ransacked, like whoever did this knew exactly what they were after. And they left a note."
"A note?" The officer nodded, pulling a small piece of paper from his pocket. It was damp, folded neatly, and looked as if it had been placed deliberately. Sam unfolded it with a practiced hand and held it up to the light. "Voodoo calls to those who seek it. The dead will rise if you dare to cross them." It was unsettling. The words weren't just a threat, they were a warning. Sam's pulse quickened, but he kept his cool. "Whoever did this is sending a message," Sam muttered to himself. He turned toward the officer. "Get the lab team in here, and have them trace any prints on the note." Sam didn't need to hear more. He had been dealing with strange crimes for years, but this was something different. He had seen enough murders, robberies, and cold cases to know when something didn't add up. There was something darker at play here. It was late in the evening when Sam sat at his desk in the precinct, the soft hum of fluorescent lights filling the room. The phone rang. The voice on the other end was masked with static, but the message was clear. "Detective Carter," the voice rasped. "You don't know me, but you need to listen. There's more to the thefts than you think. They're not just random. The stolen items all belong to Marie Laveau. You need to follow the trail. It leads to an antique shop in the South Loop. Ask for Isabel." Before Sam could respond, the line went dead. For a moment, Sam just sat there, the weight of the words sinking in. Marie Laveau. The name struck a chord. He'd heard whispers of the notorious Voodoo Queen of New Orleans. Her power, her influence, her legacy. But he had never thought it could be tied to something happening right here in Chicago. It wasn't like the usual tips he received from frustrated informants or drug dealers trying to clear their consciences. This felt different. There was something urgent about it, something that made Sam's instincts buzz. He grabbed his jacket and headed for the door. The South Loop was quieter at night, the streets bathed in the soft glow of streetlights reflecting off puddles. Sam's footsteps echoed as he walked down the alley toward the antique shop. The small storefront was tucked between two modern high-rises, almost hidden from the public eye. The sign above the door read, "Dulac Antiques." Sam pushed the door open, and a small bell tinkled as he entered. The air inside smelled of old wood, parchment, and something else. Something faintly musky, like incense. The shop was a maze of shelves, filled with dusty trinkets and objects that had seen better days. There was a charm to the place, but also a heavy atmosphere,
as if time itself had been paused. A young woman stood behind the counter, her dark eyes watching him intently as he stepped inside. Her features were sharp, but there was something intriguing about her, an aura of mystery, like she held more knowledge than she let on. She wore a simple, black dress, her hair cascading in waves down her back.
"You must be Detective Carter," she said, her voice calm but with an edge. "I've been expecting you." Sam didn't reply right away. He was still processing the strange tip. He looked around the room, taking in the old relics and maps that lined the walls, several of them depicting New Orleans in the 19th century. "Isabelle Dulac, I presume?" Sam said, his voice steady. "I need to ask you about some stolen antiques. They all have a connection to Marie Laveau." At the mention of the name, Isabelle's eyes flickered with something, a mix of recognition and concern. She didn't immediately respond, but motioned for him to sit at a small desk in the back of the shop. "I've been following the news," Isabelle said, her tone hesitant. "The thefts, they're not random. I believe someone is trying to assemble an ancient voodoo ritual kit. The artifacts that are being stolen are part of it."
Sam's brows furrowed. "Ritual kit? Voodoo? What the hell are you talking about?" Isabelle leaned in, her voice lowering as she spoke. "Marie Laveau, the voodoo queen of New Orleans. The artifacts that are being stolen, most of them, are from her personal collection. There's a group here in Chicago, a secret society called the Cross of Lorraine. They've been trying to complete the ritual for generations." Sam stayed silent for a moment, trying to process the words. It sounded insane, like something out of a supernatural thriller. But the stolen items, the cryptic messages, and the strange connections all seemed to point in the same direction. "So what does this group want?" Sam asked, his skepticism fading as he studied Isabelle's serious expression.
"They want control," Isabelle said, her eyes narrowing.
"Control over the city, over the spirits, and they'll stop at nothing to finish what they started."
Sam and Isabelle spent the next few days combing through old records and reports, digging deeper into the artifacts and their history. Isabelle was invaluable, her knowledge of the occult and its history providing insights that Sam didn't even know he needed. Each stolen item, a small, intricately carved box, an old knife stained with what appeared to be blood, a set of candles that had once belonged to Marie Laveau herself, was part of a larger puzzle. As they pieced together the clues, they realized that whoever was behind these thefts wasn't just trying to profit off of old antiques. They were after something much darker. At each crime scene, a cryptic note was left behind, like a twisted riddle meant to taunt the authorities. The message from the widow's apartment was the first clue, but there were other symbols and phrases that hinted at a deeper mystery. Isabelle identified some of the markings as a form of voodoo language, symbols used in rituals, in spells, and in sacrifices. "It's a warning," Isabelle said one night, after deciphering another message. "They're preparing for something big. The full moon is coming, and with it, the ritual will be completed. Whoever is behind this is ready to make their move." Chapter 2. The Cipher's Clue. The rain had stopped, but the chill lingered in the air as Sam Carter walked briskly through the streets of Chicago. The thefts continued to plague the South Loop, and with each robbery, the cryptic messages became more convoluted, more personal. Fear of the unknown gnawed at him, but it was Isabelle Dulac's words that echoed most loudly in his mind. "The dead will rise if you dare to cross them." Sam had no idea what kind of power was at play here, but one thing was certain: the clock was ticking, and the ritual was nearing completion. He stepped inside his car, the leather interior cold against his skin. Isabelle had given him a lead. The antique shop owner knew something more, something deeper. He had to follow it. There was too much at stake. Isabelle had told him about the strange society, the Cross of Lorraine, a group of wealthy Chicago elites who had ties to voodoo practices, their roots stretching back to New Orleans. What were they after? What was the ultimate goal? And who was the thief orchestrating these heists, leaving behind cryptic riddles and taunting messages? The only lead Sam had was the name, the Cipher, the elusive figure behind the thefts. The next morning, Sam met Isabelle at her shop to continue their research. She was already at the desk, surrounded by piles of old books, journals, and maps. She looked up as he entered. "Any luck?" she asked, her tone steady but anxious. Nothing solid, Sam muttered as he sat down. But I'm getting a feeling that we're looking at something much bigger than just a few thefts. Isabel nodded, her eyes reflecting the same wariness. I've been going over the notes left at each scene again. There's a pattern. The messages are more than just threats. They're instructions. Whoever is behind this knows exactly what they're doing. Sam leaned in, his interest piqued. What do you mean? Isabel opened an old book, its pages brittle with age. She flipped through it, stopping at a page filled with strange symbols, words, and drawings. These symbols, Isabel said, tapping the page, are used in voodoo rituals. They're part of an ancient language, a kind of spellcraft. Whoever wrote these messages is weaving a narrative, guiding us towards something. It's not just about the stolen items. It's about creating the right conditions for something much darker. Sam glanced at the symbols on the page. He was no occult expert, but he could see the connection. The same cryptic messages had been left at each crime scene, almost like clues leading to a final destination. And what's the destination? Sam asked, his voice low. Isabel hesitated. A voodoo ceremony. It's said that a specific ritual, when completed, can grant control over the spirits of the dead. It's a power so dangerous that only the most devoted would risk it. Sam's mind raced. He had seen his share of violence, but the idea of controlling spirits was something far more sinister. He rubbed his temples, trying to focus. There was a clear path forming in front of him now, but it led to something he couldn't fully comprehend. Before he could voice his concerns, the phone in Isabel's shop rang. She picked it up quickly, her brow furrowing as she listened. Her eyes met Sam's. It's from a friend, Isabel said quietly, setting the phone down. They found something, a piece of the ritual kit. But it's not just an antique, it's a piece of the puzzle. Sam straightened. Where? An old storage unit on the outskirts of the city, Isabel said. Let's go. The storage facility was tucked away in a quiet, industrial part of town, far from the bustling streets of downtown Chicago. Sam and Isabel arrived in the early afternoon, the sun casting long shadows on the concrete buildings. They walked through the facility, their footsteps echoing in the dimly lit hallways. A man in his mid-30s greeted them at the entrance. He was wearing a gray jumpsuit, his face lined with worry. Detective Carter, Miss Dulac, he said, leading them to the back of the storage complex. You'll want to see this. He led them to a small, nondescript storage unit, its metal door slightly ajar. Inside, the man gestured to a wooden crate on the floor. Sam's eyes scanned the area, but the only thing that stood out was the crate. It was old, the wood worn with age, but the intricate carvings on its surface made it unmistakable. This was the last item reported stolen, the man said. Found just last night in a nearby pawn shop. Isabel's breath caught in her throat. She stepped forward and opened the crate. Inside, nestled on a bed of velvet, was a small, silver-handled knife. Its blade was tarnished with age, but there was something about it that felt wrong. Something ominous about its presence. It's part of the ritual, Isabel whispered, her voice barely audible. This knife was used in sacrifices. Whoever is collecting these artifacts knows exactly what they need. Sam studied the knife closely. It was beautiful in its craftsmanship, but the carvings on the handle looked ancient symbols he recognized from the notes left at the crime scenes. He felt a sense of dread wash over him. Whoever was pulling the strings had been planning this for a long time. We need to get this back to the lab, Sam said, standing up straight. We need to find out who's behind this. And fast. But as Sam turned to leave, his phone buzzed. He glanced at it. A message from an anonymous number. The message simply read, "The next piece is closer than you think." Isabel's eyes widened. They're watching us. The cipher was never far behind. He had a feeling this was only the beginning of something far more dangerous. Sam sat at his desk late that night, the office empty except for the soft hum of the air conditioner. He had spent hours going over the evidence, researching the occult, the stolen artifacts, and the strange symbols left behind. He was getting closer to the truth, but it felt like the deeper he dug, the more complicated it became. Isabel had left for the night, but Sam was still tracing the connections. His fingers hovered over the keyboard as he researched the Cross of Lorraine, the shadowy organization Isabel had mentioned. From what he could gather, the group was a secret society, an exclusive club made up of Chicago's elite, all descended from families that had once held power over New Orleans. They had feared Marie Laveau in life, but now they revered her in death. And now, they were trying to control the spirits that Laveau had once commanded. As Sam read further, he realized that the society's history was shrouded in darkness, blood feuds, secret rituals, and a relentless pursuit of power. It wasn't just about the artifacts anymore.
The members of the Cross of Lorraine had been after Laveau's power for generations, but the ritual they were trying to complete could grant them far more than mere wealth. It could give them dominion over the dead. The full moon was only days away. Sam's mind raced. He had to stop them before the ritual was complete. He stood up abruptly, grabbing his jacket. The pieces were falling into place, and Sam knew that time was running out. The cipher was leading them straight into the heart of something far darker than he had anticipated. It was time to confront the truth, and Sam was determined to uncover it, no matter where it led. Chapter 3. The Cross of Lorraine. The night air was thick with tension as Sam Carter stood before the cemetery gates, the city skyline in the distance. The full moon hung like a silver pendant in the sky, its cold light casting long shadows across the graveyard's entrance. He could feel the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders like an old coat, heavy, oppressive, and uncomfortable. Beside him, Isabelle Dulac was silent. They had spent hours preparing, piecing together everything they had learned about the ritual, the artifacts, and the secret society known as the Cross of Lorraine. Everything led here, to the final piece of the puzzle, Marie Laveau's tomb. The cipher had been leading them on a chase, leaving clues, teasing them with riddles. But now the game had turned deadly serious. The ritual was nearing completion, and the last artifact, the blood-infused talisman, was hidden within the tomb itself. If Sam and Isabelle couldn't stop the ritual tonight, the spirits would be unleashed, and the power of the dead would fall into the hands of the Cross of Lorraine. But even as Sam stood there, every instinct in him screamed that the mystery was far from over. There was something about the cipher that didn't add up. Something wasn't right. "Are you ready?" Isabelle asked, her voice breaking the silence. Sam nodded, but his mind was racing. "I think we've only scratched the surface. But we don't have much time. The ritual has already begun." With a quick glance, Isabelle confirmed what Sam already knew. They'd have to move fast if they had any hope of stopping the Cross of Lorraine from completing their dark ceremony. The cemetery loomed ahead, its wrought iron gates standing like the jaws of some great beast, waiting to swallow them whole. The moonlight reflected off the tombstones, and for a moment it felt like the spirits themselves were watching, judging, waiting. Sam pushed the gate open with a creak, the sound so loud it seemed to reverberate in the silence of the night. The air smelled of damp earth and something more, a sense of ancient power. Isabelle followed him closely, her eyes scanning the darkness as they walked toward the center of the cemetery. "Marie Laveau's tomb," Isabelle whispered, pointing to a mausoleum further ahead. The stone structure was ancient, decorated with faded carvings of voodoo symbols. The air around it felt charged, as though it held the weight of centuries of secrets. Sam's heart pounded in his chest. As they neared the tomb, they saw figures moving in the shadows. The Cross of Lorraine. Their ritual was about to begin. Suddenly, the air grew colder, and Sam's breath clouded in front of him. He looked around, his senses heightened. Something was wrong. Isabelle, too, had sensed it. "They're here," she said softly, her voice tight with fear. "We're too late." Sam clenched his fists. There was no time to waste. They had to act now. The Cross of Lorraine members were gathered around the tomb, a circle of wealthy elites dressed in dark robes, their faces obscured by masks. At the center of the circle stood Etienne Moreau, the leader of the group, holding the talisman, the final piece of the ritual kit. His cold, calculating eyes locked onto Sam and Isabelle as they approached. "Well, well," Moreau said, his voice rich with condescension. "The detective and the scholar, you think you can stop us? You think you can stop me?" Sam didn't flinch. "You're playing with forces you don't understand, Moreau. This isn't just about power. Moreau smiled, a thin, dangerous smile. Life and death are trivial matters, Detective. What we seek is far greater than that. We seek dominion over the spirits, the power to shape fate itself. Sam's blood ran cold. This wasn't about a simple ritual. It was about rewriting the balance between the living and the dead. "We won't let you complete this ritual," Isabel said, her voice steady despite the fear she was no doubt feeling. "The spirits will turn on you. They're not tools to be used." Etienne laughed, the sound echoing in the still night. "The spirits have already chosen me, Miss Dulac. I am their rightful heir. The cross of Lorraine will reign supreme, and Chicago will kneel before us." With a sudden motion, he raised the talisman high above his head, chanting in a language Sam didn't recognize. The wind began to howl, and the air seemed to vibrate with an unnatural energy. The ground trembled beneath their feet, and Sam could feel the presence of something ancient, something powerful. "No!" Isabel shouted, rushing forward, but it was too late. A burst of light erupted from the talisman, and for a split second, everything seemed to freeze. The earth cracked open around them, and from the fissures, ghostly figures began to rise. Spirits of the dead, their faces twisted in agony and anger. Sam's heart pounded. He knew the ritual had worked. But this was not what Moreau had expected. The spirits were not here to serve him. They were here to exact judgment. As the spirits swirled around the cemetery, the members of the Cross of Lorraine staggered back, their eyes wide with terror. Moreau's voice turned frantic. "No! This was not supposed to happen!" he screamed, but it was too late. The spirits were no longer bound by the talisman. They had come for him. Sam stepped forward, his gun raised. "Get away from him, Isabel," he ordered. The last thing they needed was for her to get caught in this. But Isabel didn't move. She was watching the spirits, her expression a mix of awe and dread. "They're not just angry," she whispered. "They're cleansing." Moreau's face twisted in fear as the spirits swirled around him, their cold, clammy hands reaching for him. "This is my legacy. I am the heir," he shouted. But the spirits paid him no heed. They reached out, dragging him into the darkness. His screams echoed through the night as he was pulled into the ground, consumed by the vengeful spirits of Marie Laveau's past. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a shadow detached itself from the swirling mass of spirits, and Sam's blood ran cold as he recognized the figure. It was the Cipher. The Cipher, cloaked in a dark robe and mask, stood before them. They slowly removed their mask, revealing a face Sam had seen only in his dreams. A face twisted by both sorrow and rage. It was Isabel's face. "Isabel?" She gave him a sad smile. "It's me, Sam." He blinked in disbelief. "But how? You've been helping us. You've been—" "I was never helping you," Isabel said softly. "I've been helping myself." The shock hit Sam like a punch to the gut. "What do you mean?" Isabel stepped forward, her eyes dark with the weight of the truth. "I am a descendant of Marie Laveau. My bloodline is bound to this ritual. I've been watching, guiding, leading you to this moment. The Cipher was never a separate entity. It was always me." Sam couldn't believe it. The woman he'd trusted, the woman who had stood by him, had been orchestrating the entire thing. But why? Why had she gone this far? "The Cross of Lorraine used to be my family's enemy," Isabel continued, her voice cold with a vengeful resolve. "They feared my ancestors' power, and they sought to control it. But now, I've come to claim what's mine. This city belongs to my bloodline, and the spirits will answer to me." Sam took a step back, his mind reeling. "You were leading me into a trap? All this time?" "I had to," Isabel said, her voice growing quieter. "I had to make them think I was on their side. The spirits had to be released first. Only then could I stop the Cross of Lorraine once and for all." Sam's heart hammered in his chest. He had been played. Before he could respond, the spirits surrounding the cemetery began to dissipate. The ritual had been completed, but in a way, it wasn't what any of them had expected. The spirits no longer seemed to be under Isabel's control. They were free. Isabel turned toward the tomb. "It's over. The power is mine now." But the spirits had other plans. A low, mournful wail rose from the ground as the tomb shook violently. The ghostly figures that had once been bound to the Cross of Lorraine began to swirl in erratic patterns. their faces contorted, no longer merely vengeful but enraged. Sam moved toward Isabel, his voice urgent.
"You've made a mistake. The spirits aren't yours to control." Before she could respond, the spirits surged forward, and in a final, furious roar, they tore through the cemetery, claiming Isabel and the Cross of Lorraine for their betrayal. As the last of the spirits vanished into the night, Sam stood alone in the cemetery, the full moon casting its cold light on the ruins. Isabel was gone, and so were the members of the Cross of Lorraine. The ritual had ended, but the consequences would be felt for years to come. Sam Carter had stopped the ritual, but at a great cost. And as he walked away from the tomb, he knew one thing for sure. There were some mysteries better left unsolved. Chapter 4. The Echo of Marie Laveau. The streets of Chicago were quieter than usual. The usual hum of traffic and the distant sounds of the bustling city seemed muffled, as though the very atmosphere had been altered. Sam Carter walked through the South Loop, his hands in the pockets of his worn leather jacket, the chill of early morning creeping into his bones. The cemetery was behind him now, and with it, the chaos of the last few hours. The spirits had dissipated, leaving behind only the remnants of their fury. The Cross of Lorraine had been destroyed, its members either dragged into the earth or lost in the wind, and Isabel was gone. The sense of finality pressed down on Sam like a heavy weight. He had been through countless cases, solved unspeakable crimes, but this was different. The events of the last few days had shaken him to his core. He stopped for a moment at the edge of the street, looking out at the skyline of the city. He should feel relieved the ritual was stopped. The Cross of Lorraine was no more. Chicago was safe. But something gnawed at him, a feeling he couldn't shake. What had Isabel really been after? What had driven her to go so far? Sam had always known there was more to her than met the eye. But he hadn't expected the truth to be this tragic. Isabel Dulac, the woman he had trusted, had been caught in the web of her own bloodline's curse. She had used him to accomplish her goal, leading him straight into a trap. He clenched his fists, the weight of betrayal sitting heavily in his chest. But even more than that, he felt something else. Loss. She had been the last tie to something that had started long before his time. Before her time, even. Marie Laveau's legacy had loomed large in both their lives, whether they had wanted it or not. And now, both Isabel and the Cross of Lorraine were gone, leaving behind only the wreckage. A small voice broke through his thoughts. "Detective Carter?" Sam turned, recognizing the voice instantly. It was Anna, one of his old colleagues at the precinct. Her presence brought a semblance of comfort, though it didn't erase the turmoil he felt. "Anna," he said quietly, offering a brief smile. "You're up early." "I could say the same about you." Anna's eyes scanned him carefully, noting the exhaustion in his posture and the dark circles under his eyes. "You okay?" Sam gave a short, humorless laugh. "It's been a hell of a week. But yeah, I'm still here." Anna stepped closer, glancing over her shoulder before speaking in a low voice. "I heard about what happened. The Cross of Lorraine. It's all over the news. You didn't mention Isabel, though. You two seemed close." Sam's face tightened. He hadn't talked about Isabel to anyone. Not after everything had happened. "We were," Sam said, his voice soft. "But it wasn't what I thought it was. She was a part of it. Part of the bloodline. Part of the ritual. She led me into this." Anna's eyes widened, but she didn't interrupt. She simply listened, as Sam continued, the words tumbling out as if he had been holding them in for too long. "She was the Cipher," Sam muttered, still trying to make sense of it himself. "She used me. Used us all." Anna nodded slowly, her expression somber. "She didn't just deceive you, did she? She deceived herself. All that power. It wasn't something she could control, was it?" Sam shook his head, feeling a sense of hopelessness wash over him. "I don't know what she wanted in the end. The ritual was supposed to be about power, but in the end, it was just destruction. The spirits turned on her, on all of them, and now they're all gone." Anna sighed, her gaze drifting to the horizon. "It's a hell of a way for a story to end." "Yeah," Sam said softly. But it's over now. Anna paused, as if considering something. What now? Where do you go from here? Sam didn't answer right away. What could he say? His world had been turned upside down in the span of a few days. The case had started with a series of stolen antiques, things that seemed so trivial, and ended with the revelation of a centuries-old conspiracy, a ritual that bridged the gap between the living and the dead. His life had been irrevocably changed, and it was hard to imagine what came next. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, Sam made a decision. "We go back," he said quietly. "We go back to the job. There's always another case. Always something else that needs to be solved. We don't get to stop, Anna. Not until we've done everything we can." Anna nodded, a slight smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. "I'll be with you every step of the way. You don't have to do this alone." Sam appreciated the sentiment, but a part of him knew that this particular battle wasn't something that could be shared. The weight of it, the betrayal, the loss, the unanswered questions, was his alone to carry. Later that day, Sam found himself standing in front of the antique shop where he and Isabel had spent so many hours searching through records and artifacts. The windows were dark, the shop itself closed. The owner, an older man named Lucien, had been involved in the case from the very beginning, providing invaluable insight into the stolen items and their connection to Marie Laveau. Sam hadn't spoken to Lucien since the ritual had been thwarted, and he knew that the shop would be a place of quiet reflection, both for him and for the city. Sam pushed open the door, the bell above it ringing softly as he entered. Lucien stood behind the counter, his face tired, but still carrying the weight of years of knowledge. "You came," Lucien said, his voice thick with something that might have been regret. "I didn't expect to see you again." "I had to come," Sam replied, walking up to the counter. "I needed to understand something. About Marie Laveau. About the ritual, the artifacts." Lucien nodded slowly, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. "Marie Laveau's legacy is a burden to many, Detective. Not everyone who comes into contact with it is prepared for what it brings. And some end up trapped." Leaned against the counter, his gaze steady. "Isabel was trapped, wasn't she? From the beginning?" Lucien's eyes darkened. "She didn't know it at first. She thought she could control it. Use it to right the wrongs of her family's past. But power has a way of corrupting, Detective. The more she sought, the more she was drawn into the same darkness that consumed those who came before her." Sam clenched his jaw. "Is there any way to stop it? To undo what was done?" Lucien shook his head. "Once the ritual is completed, there is no undoing it. The spirits have been freed. They are no longer bound to the cross of Lorraine. And as for Isabel, she paid the price. But the city will remember what happened, what always happens when power goes unchecked." A silence stretched between them, heavy with unspoken understanding. Sam turned to leave, but Lucien's voice stopped him. "Detective, I've lived through many of these tales, but this was different. You stopped them, but you also unlocked something else." Sam turned back, a questioning look on his face. "You may have defeated the cross of Lorraine," Lucien said quietly, "but the spirits, they're still out there. They're watching, and they remember." Sam swallowed hard, the weight of those words pressing down on him. He had thought it was over, but Lucien was right. The spirits, the legacy of Marie Laveau, the power that had driven so many to madness, it wasn't finished. Not entirely. For the first time in a long while, Sam felt something stir deep within him. It wasn't fear, but something else. Something like purpose. The mystery of Marie Laveau had been one of the darkest he had ever encountered, but it had also illuminated a path forward. Sam stepped outside, the Chicago wind biting at his skin. The city was waking up, its people moving in their usual patterns, unaware of the darkness that had almost consumed them. Sam Carter knew. He knew there were always more secrets to uncover, more mysteries to solve. And he would be there, every step of the way, ready to face whatever came next. As he walked back to his car, the horizon before him seemed endless. The city had not been conquered, nor had its darkness been vanquished. But for now, it was his city,
and he would fight to protect it. The mystery of Marie Laveau was over for now. But in his heart, Sam knew this. The city would always have secrets, and he, Detective Sam Carter, would always be there to uncover them.